Let's do this. We're here to do a recap of the Attorney General debate. I'm with Anna Bryson from the Richmond Times-Dispatch. Thanks for talking with me.
Thanks for having me.
And then Sam Shirazi. He's the Virginia politics aficionado. I don't know your official title, but you talk about Virginia top politics a lot.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'll plug my podcast, Federal Fallout.
Yes, of course. I'm terrible at doing that stuff, so feel free to plug your stuff at any point. All right, so let's talk about the debate. We expected it to be about Jay Jones' text. I mean, the gubernatorial debate was about Jay Jones' text for the most part, and it's not even part of the race. So, Anna, how much of this debate was actually about those texts and the scandal enveloping Jay Jones?
It was a large part of it. I mean, in Miarz's opening statement, he brings it up right away. In almost every single question that Miarz answered, he brought it back to that in some way.
How did Miraz bring it up at first? Was it the very first thing he said, or did he start with something else?
In his opening statements, he talks about himself. He talks about Jay Jones's past history in the General Assembly, the things that he voted for that Miarz paints him as, soft on crime. And then he gets into, have a window into how Jay Jones actually thinks and sees the world. And then he goes into the text that Jones sent in 2022 in the comment about hoping that Jennifer Gilbert would watch her children die in her arms. So, yeah, he definitely gets started on that right away.
So, how did Jay respond to that? We were both in the room. It we all expected it to get there pretty quickly, and it did. So, how did Jay respond in his opening statement?
He repeats what he said right after the scandal broke. He says, I'm sorry, I'm ashamed, I regret it. But then he turns it and he says, but, Miarz wants to make this campaign about my past mistakes. It's not about my past mistakes. It's about standing up to Trump. It's about a better Virginia. And so at almost every point where Miarz brings up the texts, Jones says, I'm sorry, and this race is not about that. It's about the future of Virginia and standing up to the federal administration.
Yeah, he seemed to pivot to Trump at every turn, which seemed to be the strategy. Sam, watching it at home, what was that like? Did it seem like a sufficient response from Jay Jones to Jason Mraz about the whole scandal?
Yeah, so I mean, this race really is going to come down to those two. So for me, Art is obviously going to talk about the text. That's what he wants voters to decide upon. Jay Jones wants to talk about Trump and make this a referendum on Trump. And, I think both of them did that in the debate. And so in that sense, I don't think the debate really changed anything. The thing we don't know, and we'll find out in 19 days, is what do the voters say? Do they care more about the text, or do they care more about Attorney General who will potentially sue the Trump administration? And I think you really saw that in this debate, that kind of dichotomy. And I think the other thing I should note about the debate was the format, I think, was a lot more lawyerly because the Virginia bar was moderating it. And I think both of them, honestly, I think came off competently and more lawyerly like, and kind of contrast at the governor's debate where it's a little bit more of a free for all. And so I think, regardless of, people's personal political preference and who they thought won, I think everyone was just pleased that the debate was more kind of grounded on the issues and at least what people cared about, and less about kind of them fighting each other and interrupting each other.
Yeah, it was definitely a lot more friendly, I guess, in the sense of there was no constant interruptions. And the moderator talked about that. He said both candidates agreed to treat this debate like it was a courtroom. So I thought that was interesting. Anna, so another attack that Jason Mraz used against Jay was the driving record, the driving ticket, the speeding ticket from 2022. The story you wrote, can you give us a quick rundown on what that story is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I wrote that story October 2nd, which happened to be the day before the texting scandal came out. But it was about Jay Jones in 2022. A state trooper clocked him driving 116 miles per hour on I-64 in New Kent County. And that is one part of the story. The other part that a lot of people have focused on is that the penalty essentially for his speeding is a bit of an anomaly. Normally, somebody is driving 116 miles per hour and, they get their license suspended or they go to jail. But in this case, Jones, instead of that, his lawyers come to the court. He does 1,000 community service. 500 were at the NAACP. The 500 were at Jones's own political action committee.
Yeah, so Sam, as a lawyer, how does that look? Is that a typical thing to go that fast and then get to serve those community service hours for your own political action committee? Like, is he in danger here of getting in any actual trouble?
Well, for full disclosure, I am not a criminal attorney, but from what I've heard, I mean, typically in these kind of situations where it's not necessarily violent, no one got hurt, there are these types of agreements that are entered into place. At least I've heard that from criminal defense attorneys. Uh, I think the story it's tough because I think in some ways Miaris was trying to bring it up, but to be perfectly honest, I think the uh, voters don't necessarily have the biggest attention span. So I think the texts are probably the things that broke through more. And while Anna did obviously the reporting on it, and I think it was an important story. I don't want to say it was overshadowed by the text. I also think to a certain extent, uh, it was more kind of a speeding kind of thing where he was going very fast, but no one got hurt. And so I think it seemed like if that was the only story, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. I think that combined with the text kind of creates this thing that Miares was able to talk about. And I think Jay Jones was there was never going to be a good answer on his part. I think he was doing his best to just kind of pivot, go to the Trump angle. He apologized. So long story short, I mean, I think we'll just have to wait and see if anything comes out. I mean, my personal opinion is that unless he misrepresented something in the court, which I don't think he did, I mean, that's maybe a bone of contention, but the Commonwealth's attorney went along with it at the time. I mean, maybe now they're kind of second guessing it, but it seems like everyone had moved on other than when the story came out.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
seems like Miares tries to, I'm not sure his exact words, but he sort of infers that Jones may have misled the court. It is not clear at this point, at least from my reporting, but I think he's trying to make the point that if you go to the New Kent courthouse, you get those court records, you will see two letters from the two organizations which he did community service. In the one where he does it for his own PAC, there's nothing in that letter that says that Meet Our Moment is Jay Jones's PAC. So I think that's what Miares is trying to get at. But again, it's not confirmed that he misled the court in any way. And I don't think Miares said that, but he was sort of moving in that direction.
Yeah, and Jay did make sure to specify that he completed court-approved community service. So it seems like it was approved by the court. Um, and so Jay's strategy for all this stuff was to pivot back and tie Miares to Donald Trump. Trump lost 3 elections in a row here. He lost by like 5 points last year. What did Jason do to try and push back on these attacks without alienating the Republican base? This is a tightrope that he has to walk. He doesn't want to distance himself from Trump. So how did Jason address these attacks from Jay, Anna?
Well, one of Jones's big things is, when I'm attorney general, I'm going to stand up, I'm going to sue the Trump administration. And at one point, Miares says, I did sue the Trump administration. That was in August. He sued Trump's VA for veterans to get their full education benefits. And Jones responds to that a little, and he says, okay, he said that's respectable, quote. And then he basically says, but you had a lot of other opportunities to sue the Trump administration, and you haven't done that.
Tim, how effective do you think tying Trump to Jason Miares is going to be? Glenn Youngkin or Terry McAuliffe tried to tie Glenn Youngkin to Donald Trump in 2021, and it seems to have not worked. But Trump wasn't in office. Trump is now in office. There's a big difference there. How effective do you think this could be?
So, I mean, at the beginning of the year, I was saying the Virginia elections tend to be referendums on the incumbent president. So in 2021, it didn't work because Trump wasn't in office. Youngkin talked about Biden, even though, it was a state election. Youngkin tried to tie McAuliffe to Biden, and I think that worked. Clearly, Spanberger and the entire Democratic ticket is trying to tie the Republicans to Trump. And I think for the most part, it's been working. If you look at the polls, I mean, they may be tightening, but consistently, Spanberger's had a lead. I think the question now becomes in this race, does as I said at the beginning, the text become more important or does the connection to Trump become more important? And I think the one thing to keep in mind, Miara's in the debate said, you should be running for Congress. You keep talking about DC. I think the reality is a lot of voters understand that as much as this is a state election, the federal government in Virginia has a lot of influence. We see it with the shutdown. We see it with the federal firings. So I don't know how effective that is. And I think if you are a voter and your number one issue is you want to send a message and vote against Trump, I think Jones was able to kind of time yours to Trump. If you're more a voter in the middle and you may not like Trump, but you also didn't like the text, I think Miares was able to kind of make his case. So again, it ultimately comes down to the voters and which one they decide is more important to them.
Yeah. So they did get into some other issues tonight. Reggie came up, the regional greenhouse gas initiative. It's a complicated thing. Go read up on it if you don't know. It's about basically it's pushing renewable energy more into the like how Virginia gets its power. Um, Democrats put it into law back years ago, and then when Glenn Youngkin took office, he basically used an executive order to get rid of it. He lost the lawsuit, but it's locked up in appeals now. So it's a real Democratic versus Republican issue. Democrats want Reggie, Republicans don't. Jason Miyares went pretty hard against Reggie tonight. Said he's towing the Republican line. He wants an all the above energy approach. He praised natural gas. He said, "I'm old enough to remember when natural gas was considered a clean energy." Given his strategy this week of trying to, you know, coax some Spamberger voters over to his side, basically plating with Spamberger voters, hey, it's okay if you're not voting for Winston, but you can still vote for me because Jay Jones is bad. And it showed clips of Abigail Spamberger not endorsing Jones at their debate. Is this an interest? Like, I know it's a niche subject, but do you think that it was interesting, Sam, that he went so hard against Reggie while he's trying to go more to the middle and attract Democratic voters?
I think the Republicans think this is actually an issue that helps them because obviously there's been concern about the rise in energy costs. You could argue that's really data centers driving it, but the Republicans certainly want to make the argument that Reggie's the cause of it. And so they're kind of standing up. And, to your point, I don't know like how much the average voter knows about this. It seems a little bit in the weeds. And I think the reality is whoever wins the governor's race, and especially if the Democrats get a trifecta, like that kind of resolves it because I think if Spamberger wins, she's going to get back into Reggie. And I also think there could be, I mean, even some Democrats have admitted that there might be changes needed to it. So long story short, I mean, I think as much as this is a legal question and, we'll see what if the legal case is moot, I think it's really more of a policy question and probably not going to decide the election. But I think the next General Assembly will really need to think about, are they going to make any changes to the kind of overall setup?
So if you were to take me back a month ago, I would have expected this debate to be Jason Miara saying soft J Jones, soft J Jones, soft J Jones. He brought it up a little bit, but Anna, can you give us some context from your reporting on what soft J Jones means? Like, what is he referencing there?
Mm-hmm. And I mean, he does bring it up in his opening statement. I believe his closing statement as well. But I mean, before the texting scandal, a big part of Miars's campaign was bringing up these past things that Jones voted for that essentially for some offenses would give people less time in jail. And I think he has a lot of new material now, but I do think he was still talking about that as part of, trying to paint Jones as soft on crime. I think the phrase he uses is criminals first, victims last.
Yeah. And Sam, have you seen Jones really have a good response to that attack other than pivoting to Trump?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that Jones did that was effective was, he didn't just say, "Oh yeah, there's also Trump is bad." He said, "You haven't prosecuted Trump." I mean, obviously, there's not going to be a criminal prosecution, but in terms of the civil lawsuits, and so I think in that sense, it's kind of and that was Jay Jones' response about I think he calls it weak Jason Miyares, soft Jay Jones, weak Jason Miyares. So he's trying to paint Jason Miyares as weak by not going after Trump. And, obviously, I think there is the Republican strategy of law and order. And I think, as you mentioned, that would have been the main theme had there not been this other thing. So overall, I mean, I think at the end of the day, uh, it's probably not going to be the issue that decides this election because the Republicans have a little bit moved on, and for the other voters, I mean, they're focused on Trump. So, long story short, I mean, even though it is kind of in the background, and Miaras did spend a lot of money on the ads, I don't know if that's going to be deciding it in the closing days.
All right, Sam, before we wrap it up, I want to ask you, do you think Jones survived the night? Do you think he remains or is a viable candidate that can win the race after this debate?
Yeah, so in terms of like a big game changer, I don't think that happened. I don't think either of them had this huge gaffe. I don't think it's like the next day we're all going to be talking about this debate. I think both of them did what they had to do. They had their game plan. They kind of executed it. I think the stakes were higher for Jones because he needed to do something to reassure people. And in that sense, I think he has. And you could see from some of the Democratic officials who put out statements. Lamont Bagby, who's a state senator, and he's the chair of the Democratic Party in Virginia, put out a statement saying, Jay Jones won, which you would kind of expect him to say that, but the fact that he put out the statement, I think, is a statement in of itself. And so I think Jones did what he had to do, and he had the harder task. Miares, he scored some points, but at the end of the day, like this wasn't going to be a game changer for him. He survived. He didn't get any sort of huge gaffe. So long story short, was an interesting debate. I think a lot of people were watching it to see how Jay Jones would do. I think he did what he needed to do. And it goes back to that question: is the election going to be decided by the text, or is it going to be decided by Trump? And again, we'll find out in 19 days.
All right. Well, I want to thank you guys again, Anna Bryson from the Richmond Times-Dispatch and Sam Shirazi. And shout out your podcast again.
It's federal fallout. I'll probably be doing one Saturday morning that talks about the AG debate. So
Again, and thank you. And if you join this stream late, it'll be going out in full to subscribers, along with 2 bonus interviews from state senators from both sides of the aisle who gave their thoughts on the debate. I also saw my mom just join the stream, so I wanted to say hey to my mom. Thanks everybody for watching, and be on the lookout for the full video.
yeah.